Thank you, Joe, and it's a pleasure to be here this morning. As Joe said, my name is Amy Butler, and I'm with Oakland University. That's the Oakland University in Michigan, not in California. I run a business incubator and smart zone accelerator there, and we focus in IT and energy and medical device because there's an underlying connection between all three. And I work very closely with the School of Engineering and Computer Science as well. Michigan has a framework of incubator accelerators called smart zones, and we work interactively together in order to help startup and growth businesses to be successful and to move along the continuum of growth. Healthcare has become a very, very large portion of our industry sector in Michigan, particularly in Oakland County. When we did an assessment just recently, we found that we had over 100,000 people employed in the healthcare industry in Oakland County alone. We had to pay attention to that. We realized that this is a sector we'd always been known as the automotive belt of the world, but the innovations we were experiencing through the automotive industry were becoming readily adaptable and finding solutions for the healthcare industry. With the aging population and challenges that we had to find solutions. So this has become a very large focus for Michigan, and I'm very pleased to be able to be here and talk about this particular subject of financing. We have a diverse panel here with us today to give us several different perspectives on what does it mean, how do you get financing, what is financing? Because everyone that walks in the door of an incubator says, I need money. But I haven't found anyone yet that's actually been ready to get the money that they think they need at that time. So it's really being able to assess where are they in their continuum, where are they strategically in their business plan and their development, and what is the right funding for them at the right time, and how does this strategically, the finance strategy for them work to get them to success in the market. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. We're going to have each panelist provide a few comments, and then we'll open it up for questions. We're going to start with Jim. We've got 4 different panelists today: Jim Stauner, Steve Anderson, Allan, Daisley, and Joe Bjorklund. Hope I got that right. Jim is an operating partner from Roundtable in medical device activities. Steve Anderson is CEO of Preceptus Medical. Allan Daisley is executive director of the Memphis Bioworks Foundation. And then Joe Bjorklund is the CEO of Insituvue. Say it again.
Insituvue.
Insituvue. Okay. Oh, well. Sorry. I'm going to have to practice that one. So we're going to start a little bit with Jim and have him talk about the various types of financing tools that are out there. And then our other panelists are going to talk about what some of their experiences are. Because it's not just about everybody needs a venture capitalist. It's not everybody needs an angel. It's not everybody can walk in the door and get the $20 million they need right now. It's how do you layer the tools that are out there in order to achieve your ultimate goal? How do you put that strategy together? So with that opening, Jim, would you like to start us off?
Sure, Amy, thanks. Delighted to be here, everyone. What I thought I would do is start with the basics, and then we can work through. I've got down 6 different areas of funding possibilities. There might be others that folks out there have, and as a part of this dialogue, as Joe was pointed out earlier this morning, I think it's all about, hey, folks benefiting from others' experiences. So we'll talk a little bit about that as a panel, and then others in the room may have had specific experiences that would be very, very beneficial to share as well. The first place I would start, folks come to us a lot as a private equity firm with great ideas. We're positioned a little bit differently than other private equity firms in the space. So I'll talk about that just so folks have an understanding. Not everybody's into startups. Some folks have different agendas relative to the commitments they've made to their limited partners as a part of their fund. No question, from what we saw this morning, the first 2 sessions, a very tough environment today versus even a few years ago. You look at the reimbursement landscape, regulatory pathways, comparative effectiveness if you're talking about new products, really difficult for a startup or a new product to get into the market. However, I will tell you, there are funds available for good, solid products with a good business plan. And that's a cornerstone that I think all of us will come back to, is you have to have a solid business plan. You need to know where your product fits into the market landscape. You know, who are the competitors in that landscape? How does a strategic potentially have interest in what you're all about? Things of that sort. And the other important thing is to really make sure you've got your business plan laid out into what I'll call milestone events. You know, Amy had said folks coming in the door saying, well, I need $15 million. Well, guess what? We don't have $15 million to give you. But if you can break that down, hey, if I have $1.5 million or $2 million, I can get to this particular milestone. Maybe it's proof of concept. Maybe it's getting to a certain clinical trial, a quality measure indicator, something that somebody could say, boy, I can hang my hat on that, because I know if you get there, I could probably get you to that next level. So really make sure as you're looking through your business plan, you've got it very detailed and concise around the dollars involved, what it would take for you to get to a particular milestone event. The chances of success will be a lot greater if you get into that granular of detail. And if you don't have that expertise, because I'm sure folks would say, well, I'm not exactly sure what it's going to take or what I need to do to get to a particular milestone, you need to probably work with an expert. So sometimes that will take some upfront investment on your behalf to find somebody, and maybe through networking in this room or other audiences, you can find those individuals to really make sure they're helping you lay that landscape out. You know, we can probably get to this point with this level of investment. You know, once we get there, then we can go talk to people about add-on capital, so on and so forth. So I really want to make sure that one thing you're hearing from me is make sure that up front, before you go talk to anybody about money, have a good, solid business plan that's well thought out, concise, and it's got level of detail to it that you can stand behind. And again, from a competitive standpoint, or folks that might be interested, I'm going to talk a little bit later about corporate venture funds and the like. Don't be afraid to say, hey, maybe a Medtronic or a Covidien, maybe they're not a bad partner. Maybe they would work with my particular product area. And not every company needs to go from, say, 0 to, well, I'm going to be at 20 million or 50 million in 3 to 5 years. Maybe that's not the case. That's okay. It might be a great opportunity for you to be doing something on a licensing deal with one of those big corporate entities and the like. So funding options that I've listed out here, I'll go through them and then I'll come back to each one. Non-dilutive, those would be like grants and loans, bio-organizations, maybe incubators that you'll hear a little bit about, angel investors, their role, VCs and private equity, corporate venture funds, and then what I'll call corporate healthcare managed care funds. Those would be people like Kaiser Permanente and Humana, and I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. First, non-dilutive financing. I ask people this a lot, because if you're looking for startups, these are great opportunities to get startup capital where you can get to one of those milestone events and maintain your own intellectual property rights. Working with the government, people like DARPA. I don't know how many folks out there have worked with the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, but it's a great organization in the medical device world to get started. They have billions of dollars that they allocate towards R&D every year, not as a total, every year. And they're looking for new innovative technologies that would support what they need to get accomplished from a defense standpoint. Now, the first thought most folks have is, yeah, but my product's not oriented towards trauma on the battlefield. It doesn't have to be. That definitely is a sweet spot that they have. But think about the VA system. They're taking care of all those veterans that are out there in that environment. There's a whole host of different products or services that could benefit the VAs. Or you look at the service individual's family. They're also interested in how that family could be protected, because they always believe, hey, a good family support system in the military helps to make a happier, more efficient warrior out in the battlefield. So keep that in mind. It doesn't have to be something that's just trauma related if you're going to be working with the government. But if you haven't thought about that, you can go online, Google DARPA, D-A-R-P-A. It'll show you exactly what you need to do. Great place to start. No guarantees, but they've put funding. I'm aware of companies that I've talked to, worked with, where they've got in the teens to $20 million plus in R&D to get to those milestone events, where then they've been able to take that and go out, and the government's not looking for anything in exchange outside of hopefully that product gets to the market and can help the government from a standpoint of the things that I had mentioned earlier. So that's a great one to keep in mind. And they're a good clinical resource as well. They've got folks that have a lot of knowledge. So when we talk about some of these quality measure indicators, credentialing, they can help along those pathways as well. So again, a good opportunity if you're in a startup situation. I think we've got other panelists here who'll talk a little bit more about the incubators and some of that, but those are all good non-dilutive ways to approach things. Angel investors. Angels used to only do things in that $250,000, $500,000 range, and sometimes that was good depending on where you think you need to go. But again, going back to my earlier comment about know what that financial plan needs to look like to get to a milestone event. Angels now are doing more like what VCs have done historically, and that's syndications. So maybe 3 or 4 angels will get together to make an investment in something where you could get $2 million from an angel group. And once you do that, then maybe those $2 million get you to a point where, okay, now we're ready to go talk to a big person to get some add-on capital, or go talk to a strategic, because maybe that's a good exit strategy at that point in time. If you're not familiar with angels, a good place to start is there's a website. It's Angel Capital Association. I don't know if folks have tapped into that, but you can go on there. And it's basically set up regionally around the country. It doesn't have to be, but usually if you're working with an angel, if you're here in the Midwest, there are angel groups in the Midwest. It's probably best to work with one of those folks, because they're going to want to have some oversight, maybe a spot on the board, things of that nature. So just keep that in mind as you're looking at potentially working with angel folks. Venture capital and private equity. Ventures, they'll typically they'll work across any level of funding. It could be true startups. It might be growth capital down the road. One thing that I point out to people is most states, major metro markets, will have venture capital and private equity associations. You can go online, you can check those groups out. They have meetings like this. They're great for networking opportunities, because let's face it, most of what you do in this space is really about networking and getting to know people. You can join those groups, and they'll basically have little booklets put together around the different partners that they have within that association, and spell out, well, what is the level of interest that that particular VC or private equity group has? What's their range of investment profile, risk assessments that they do, risk tolerance, things of that sort. They're not all the same. I'm in a private equity group that does growth capital for businesses that are already commercialized and out looking from going from, say, 20 million to 50 to 100 million. Totally different than a startup where you need that early money to get going. So if you get in, you can learn what those VCs and private equity groups do. They've all made commitments to their limited partners, and that's something I wanted to point out here too, because I get this question asked a lot. We see a lot of neat companies, a lot of neat products that are truly startups. That's not what we've committed to do with our limited partners. We're a growth capital firm that's oriented downstream. Doesn't make the product, doesn't make the business a bad thing. It's just something you need to know as you're talking to folks around who invests in what type of company or product at what stage, so you have a good understanding of that. So again, you can go to those associations and learn a lot more about who's who in a particular marketplace. Corporate venture funds. These are the folks like Covidien, Medtronic, J&J, GE Healthcare, Novartis. They've got all their own venture groups that are looking to put money into some startup situations. It gives them early market intelligence, visibility to maybe some innovative technologies. Quite honestly, in the back of their mind, if it really takes off, they're looking for maybe a discount on a potential deal, but that may be okay. Maybe that's a good play for you and your particular product or your company as it relates to where you need to go in the marketplace. As we've talked about time and time again this morning, it's a tough landscape and an environment out there. Maybe working with a strategic at some point makes a lot of sense, because they'll have the horsepower and the wherewithal to maybe take that product to the market. So maybe you end up with a licensing deal, or you end up with that partner who's got a majority control, but at least your product's getting to the market and you benefit from that downstream. So keep that in mind. And then the other one, on a similar vein, is these healthcare funds. As I mentioned, Kaiser Permanente's got one. They'll typically invest anywhere from 5 to 7 million, or Humana. They're a little bit smaller, 1 to 2. They're looking again for visibility into some new innovative technologies, things that could benefit their caregivers downstream as well. And with that, they've got obviously a lot of clinical expertise. So all these things like helping with quality measures, outcomes performance, things of that sort, those types of groups can be very good and beneficial, helping you get some of that put behind, so you got those credentials as you go forward in your strategy. Okay? So turn it back over to you, Amy.
Yeah. Steve, would you like to go next and give us a little bit of background on, you talked a little bit about
Sure.
angels and some of your experiences.
Absolutely. My name's Steve Anderson. I'm the CEO of Perceptus Medical. We are a startup company located in Minneapolis, extremely small by purpose, trying to keep things frugal and trying to limit the amount of capital we need to raise, which kind of ties to the stories we're hearing today. We have come up with solutions so that ear tube surgery for kids can be done without the risk of general anesthetic and without the need for an OR, thereby significantly reducing costs. So, there's our pitch right there. Our 1-2 is way safer, way cheaper. Luckily for us, we don't need different codes. The codes and the coding and the payment are already out there. So, the question we had before about CPT really doesn't apply for us. We can go out, right to the doctors. We say we have a significantly safer therapy, and to the providers and to the insurers, we can say we have a significantly less costly opportunity. So, to a certain degree, there's one way you get started with trying to figure out how to raise money. You have to figure out an idea that fits into the sweet spot of where people are looking. So, we've all heard, don't fall in love with the technology and look for a market. That couldn't be more true today. You've got to figure out where this is going to go. There was some really interesting stuff. I don't know if people read the Money Tree report, but the numbers all came out over the last couple of days. So this is put out by Pricewaterhouse and the NVCA. Nationally, funding fell 6.4% in first quarter. Funding for devices for VC funding declined 20% in first quarter nationally. And the Dow Jones had the overall funding down 11.8%. In Minnesota, VC funding dropped 58% in first quarter compared to last year. 9 deals, $37.5 million. None of them were seed capital. The good news is, of the 9 deals, 5 were devices and equipment. Hilera raised $10 million, but they had a pretty illustrious group of current investors. They had Morgan Thaler, Split Rock, Versant. Celleration raised 6.4. They're in wound care, Mardials, and in functional MR. They raised 4.3. Neocords also in MR. They raised 3. And wound care technologies raised 1.2. These are the types of deals that are being done locally here. So my thoughts on this are, we talked about limited partners, but they have been negative. Why is VC funding for devices going down? The limited partners are very bearish, and you can't blame them. We've had negative returns over the last 10 years, a mediocre IPO market, increased time for return on investments, significant concern regarding FDA process, and then as we've talked about, the big one, which hasn't even really hit us yet, which is payment and how this is all going to fit together. So the results of bearish LPs on the device sector, less VCs investing in devices, VCs that have been device specific are having a hard time raising funds. Sometimes these funds may not, even if you think you're good, your fund may not be able to make their cash call, and you'll be the last to know it. They're not going to tell you until the last second. There's a lot of large funds that are still following a classic model. I mean, these are the big names. These are the NEAs and the Orbits, and they're out there, but they have a lot of ideas to pick from right now. And, what the other funds are, the other funds are looking at different opportunities. I mean, they are looking at secondary and direct deals. A lot of them have moved to what they call late stage investing. They're trying to reduce their risk. Now, 5 years ago, late stage used to be, you were near a clearance or you're near a PMA approval. Nowadays, late stage means that you're already generating maybe a significant amount of revenue traction. So, things have really changed. So let me talk about a couple of alternatives. One thing that's come up and we've heard a lot about is crowdfunding. I just don't see how that works in devices. I can't for the life of me come up with one way that that's going to work in the field we're in. I actually had somebody from the Gray Sheet call me a couple months ago, and they were all excited, and they were going to write an article. And by the time I got done talking to them, I think I killed their article. So, I mean, it's great in other areas, consumer electronics. I mean, you can give people something. What are we going to give people? A medical device, a prescription device? Try to get strategics to come in early. There's been a lot of discussion on this, but the evidence isn't really very clear that they're doing this. Now, there's going to be more discussion on this at this meeting, but it's not easy. They're not used to coming in extremely early. You got angel groups out there, and angel groups can be good to work with. They can also be difficult to work with. You have a lot of cooks, and you don't have any direct staff, and it makes it a little bit harder. Quite frankly, they're so worried about dilution in the upcoming rounds when the VCs come in that they'll put terms together in the early rounds that would be considered onerous by anybody. And then you have angels, which can, that's where a lot of companies are turning to angels, and as he had talked about, non-dilutive financing for grants. That can be a really good way to go get that grant application in early, because it's going to take a while to get through. First you got to get through your phase 1 and then your phase 2. So a couple of suggestions that I have for the Minnesota companies here. How many people here have used the Minnesota Angel Tax Credit? One. So that's actually not really a good thing, because it is really a wonderful incentive. Now, you're going to have a hard time getting a deal done strictly because of the credit, but it's a very nice sweetener on a deal. You can get, the investors can get up to, within certain terms of the deal, a 25% rebate. You don't have to be within the state of Minnesota, and it's, you know, it's not an immediate rebate, it's on the next year's tax returns. So if you're in Minnesota, it'll reduce your tax burden by that amount. If you have no tax burden, it is an immediate rebate. So I would advise people to look very carefully into that. The popularity of this program is really increasing. A couple of years ago, the money ran out in November. Last year, it ran out in June. This year, they're looking at kind of a May, June timeframe. In Minnesota, they have 12 million dedicated towards this. Look for smaller funds that are doing early stage. There's a few out there. Michigan actually has a number of nice little small funds that are willing to go early stage, and they're starting to show up at some of the meetings here locally. The MedTech Investment Conference, which is on May 8th coming up. That's a good idea. Again, obviously I said this before, ideas geared towards reduction of costs. You want something obviously that you can go right to payers and talk to them about reduction of costs. You want strategics to be hovering over that space. You need to be frugal with your use of capital. We talked about this already. You need to be willing to go without a safety net. The days again, 25 million, and just thinking you're gonna, you know, if you have a few hiccups, you'll work through it. Those days are done. You're gonna have to take the minimum amount of capital you need, get to a milestone, and then do it again. Network with other entrepreneurs, be at the meetings. You've got to talk to the people that are out there. And then finally, I would say make sure your pitch and idea works. I mean, you know, I swear every pitch that I've ever had, no matter how many times I look at it, I'm always constantly trying to improve it, have experts look at it, have other people look at it, make certain that what you're saying, that your value proposition rings true with the people you're trying to talk to. And then I do want to just remind everybody, we had the Representative Paulson here and Senator Klobuchar. You know, the problems that they're dealing with may not impact you today, but they will impact you in the future. Work with them on a repeal of the excise tax. You know, using an excise tax as a tax apparatus is a horribly bad idea, and also improve the efficiency of the FDA process. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Now, Steve talked a couple of times, mentioned a couple of things, getting your, and so did our first speaker, about making sure you get a strategy and looking at those different components. And one of the ways that you can get those resources is working with an incubator or working with an organization that helps those companies walk through their steps, look at the milestones, help you figure out some of the different tools and financing strategies that can be used. Allan, do you want to talk a little bit about your role now and how you play into that kind of a strategy?
Yeah, sure. Be happy to. So I work at the Memphis Bioworks Foundation, which is a local 501c3 nonprofit, as you probably guessed, based in Memphis, Tennessee. And our focus, you know, we were formed back in 2001 with a mission to promote economic development through the biosciences, and specifically we look at you know, trying to attract and retain talent in the Memphis area, trying to grow businesses, and what we've done is we've sort of taken a focus on, you know, look at the areas where we have strength and basically double down on those. So, you know, Memphis, we have a good core base of medical device activity. There's Wright Medical's headquartered there. There's, you know, Smith & Nephew, Medtronic. There's a lot of orthopedic and spine activity going on in the area. And then you also have, you know, St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital, the Bonner, Methodist Baptist. There's a whole medical center and a lot of activity there. So, you know, this has been an area of core strength for us. So we've been looking to build infrastructure, and specifically my responsibilities on the entrepreneurship side to really build those businesses that we think have a chance of changing the landscape of the city going into the future. So on the entrepreneurship side, what we found is that there are lots of issues, and specifically as the device, which is near and dear to my heart, we looked at companies that were trying to take root, and obviously financing has been a huge issue. You all know it. It's in your town and it's in mine. So we just thought, well, what could we do to try and to change that whole landscape? And we set up a business incubator, which we've been running for several years, and then it's one very effective way for companies to come in the early stages, go through the initial formulation of your business plan, growing your business. It's a friendly environment where you can come in and sort of be nurtured through the process of getting your pitch straight, getting your business plan straight. Even we have services where we can help you, in terms of guidance through the FDA process, as well as hiring and building your team, connections in the community. And so what we found is that that's a good option for companies that are in their very nascent stages. And because it's a really tough world out there. If you've ever done this before, it's the FDA process, trying to get your approvals or clearances, trying to do your product development all at the same time, trying to build your team, manufacturing, where should I start? Should I start here or abroad? There are all these questions that an incubator environment can really surround you with the experts who know and can help you through that process. Lately, what we've done, and we're in the second year, is we decided that we would look at a different model, which is, now there's a very popular model, the accelerator model that's popular in the IT and internet space, where they bring you in and they sort of take you through a 3-month high intensity boot camp style program. There's some famous ones like Y Combinator, Techstars, and so on. And what they've done is they've managed to kind of combine the investment and the training all in one. So it's a way to sort of churn out in a rapid fashion high potential, high growth companies. The premise is that you invest a little money in them, and that will help take them through the early stages, help them to do the things that you would normally take about a year to do, cram it into 3 months, put it on steroids, if you will, and then you could, at the end, with a heavy focus on mentorship, you have a company that's much more ready to be invested in, and by the way, you have investors actually waiting on the back end to look at that. So we thought that was a really good model, except that it's really, really hard to accelerate devices. I mean, devices take 5, 7, 10 years and about $1 gazillion to get to market. So how could you accelerate something like that? So what we decided to do was, we really like that model, but let's see what we can do. Is there any sort of way that you could accelerate part of this process? So we focused in on the 510K, and 510Ks, if you're really good about them, you can get significant milestones to happen in about a year. Of course, you have to pick technologies that are not going to take you 2 years to prove out and things like that. And so what we've done is we put together an accelerator program for medical devices. As far as I know, it's the first one and only one that's out there. And what we do is we bring up to 6 teams in, and when we take them through, it's a 3-month process where we work on their entrepreneurship skills. We surround them with some classroom activity. So we bring in experts in FDA regulatory, reimbursement, compliance, and then the basic business building things like marketing, finance, accounting, insurance, all these sorts of things. And so we put together a curriculum of pretty high intensity activity, as well as we get a group of mentors that's experts in all of these areas, and specifically we look for mentors who have done it before, who've been there, done that, and can really help get them through the pitfalls of this business building experience. And then the sort of icing on the top of the cake is that we provide up to $150,000 in seed funding, and this is as a couple of the other panelists have said before, it's tough money to get. Matter of fact, it's, the seed money is tough to get, the follow-on is tough to get, but, really, who's going to help you get that startup funding? There are a lot of VCs who we deal with as well, and as I think Steve rightly noticed, is that late sort of growth stage has now become what's your revenue, and at this point, when you just have an idea or a first prototype, there is no revenue. So we feel like we fill a good niche in that we do it from pre-revenue stage, and it's a really early stage, and what we do is we structure it such that you get $50,000 on entry. We go through that first 3-month period, and then we have another phase 2, which you get to pitch to us, and then there's another $100K that's in it for you at that point. And we find this is a good way. $50,000 is nothing in device, but at the same time, it might be what you need to get your act together, get a plan. Because it's really hard to get any kind of funding without having, a regulatory path, for example. How are you going to take this to clearance? And typically, nobody's going to put any money into you if you don't at least have that. Well, we actually help you get that. So we do some pretty intensive evaluation of the companies before we bring them into the program. And then when they come in, we walk them through, we set milestones, and at the end of the first phase, your pitch to us is, what have I done with my milestones, and what would I do with another $100K? We also have the flexibility to say, well, if $100K is not going to help you, what do you need really? Last year we did a $2.5 million Series A, and that's one of the things that we have the flexibility to do is invest as it makes sense. Now, the way we structured it is I have 2 local VCs that I work with. One's actually under our umbrella. This is one of the things we realized a couple of years back was there was no really good seed funding, and so we created a fund. It's a long story, but we actually ended up creating a fund, and so we actually do invest in a number of early stage companies, and that we sort of parlayed into a relationship with another local VC, and these VCs also invest a lot with angels. Matter of fact, for every $1 that we invest, there are about $3 that we bring in off of the sidelines through angels. Angels, there's they're here and they're there and they're everywhere. You just have to find them, and angels, they tend to invest in what they know, and so you really need to be in that sweet spot a lot of the times, and having that network that you can call on. If you have an orthopedic device, or if you have a catheter or something, you need to find those VCs, those angels who are in that space, and that's what's going to be really important as you go forward. Anyway, so we managed to bring all this money to the table, and as we go forward, those 2 VCs are the ones that make the investments. After that first phase of the program, then we have another phase, which is more not so much a time-bound phase, but a milestone-bound phase. And you'll hear me harping on milestones all the time, because it's one of the things that you really have to look at. And I think Jim mentioned this earlier as well. You don't necessarily, if your product's going to take you $10 million to get to market, that's a tough ask at the beginning. So you may want to look at breaking that down into phases that you can put funding together based on milestones, and VCs like to have, the little trapdoors that they can exit if you don't meet the milestones. So it's a sort of a sharing of the risk with you, and we strongly believe in that. So we tranche the funding. You get $50,000 first, you pitch to us for another 100 or whatever it might be, and then we can set you up on a new set of milestones that will be, it might be that you prove the concept. It might be that that 510K is a milestone. It just depends. Every device is different, but we strongly believe that one of the best ways that you can really approach this is looking at it from a milestone basis, that an approach that makes sense for both you and for who's funding you. So that's sort of the program in a nutshell, and we believe that this really fills a niche in the market that is really needed. Not everybody's going to be able to take a product from beginning to end on their own, and sometimes a little help is what you need. And whether that's in an accelerated format or whether it's sitting in a business incubator where you sort of take your time and do it over the course of a year or two, there's a really big role that institutions and programs like this have to play in the development of medical device companies. Thank you.
And Joe, as president and CEO of Insituvue, and recently being involved in a recent sale of a major company, what can you add to the strategy that we've talked about so far that you think would help people in understanding how to put together a financing strategy that will get them to their goals?
Yeah, and I think it starts there's a lot to piggyback on here that has been talked about, and I'll give you hopefully some real life examples of what you can utilize. First of all, this is a exercise of trial and error. Anyone who claims they're an expert at funding, I want to talk to that person for a long time because I come out of the imaging world, the ultrasound world, and Insituvue makes a device that is particularly geared towards vascular access, but is living in a existing paradigm of ultrasound that brings up all kinds of expectations and connotations in people's mind. And to piggyback on one thing said earlier about DARPA grant, actually that is a good avenue. There was a company I was involved in 2000 called Sonosite that you may have heard of, and all of the initial R&D for that product was done on a DARPA grant. I believe they got $12 to $14 million. Was spun off from ATL, which is now Philips Ultrasound. That company just sold to Fujifilm last year for $995 million. So that's certainly a success story on that. The other thing is there's a lot of talk in the room today about how government gets in our way. The government can help you. Remember that too. Insituvue got a $250,000 grant under the federal stimulus program that we got simply because we were paying attention, to be honest. We were able to show, when you talk about milestones, we were able to show very, very clearly what that money was going to be used for. And so you got to be really careful about, give me $10 million and I'll rule the world. It's if you were to give us this is exactly what we would do with it. If you were to give us that, this is exactly what we would do with it. And be prepared to be flexible as entrepreneurs too. No one in our company has drawn a salary for 6 months. And part of the reason we do that is not because we like it, but because we think it sets a good example to potential investors. So that sort of goes to the think ahead. Another example I'll give you is be willing to listen to anybody. We can get very jaded. I'm part of that world too, where you say, oh, here's someone inquiring about our product, and geez, we're not even FDA approved yet, which we're not. And actually that's our next milestone. But I got a call from a gentleman who was a resident at a military hospital. And my first impression would be, this guy doesn't have any money. I mean, he's a resident, he wants to use our device for a study and blah, blah, blah. Well, I took his phone call and we talked for about an hour, and as it turned out, he is closely tied to the colonel who runs all the special forces for the U.S. Army. And we're in active discussions now with special forces about could we do some validation with our device, pre-510K. Obviously not on patients. It would be cadavers and phantoms and so forth. But because we believe that, as I thought about it more, I think we want to go down this route because if we can prove we're definably the best at something, without question, that goes outside the existing paradigm, then the doors, we believe, open up a little bit. That even if it's a $5-10 million limited market, if you can dominate that space everyone knows it's going to flourish from there. It can be applied to other applications. So we're very focused on what can we dominate and not getting too hung up on how big a market is it and how big, but show investors a definable pathway of how to get there. Let's see, what other mistakes have I made that you can learn from? Have comparative examples. One comparative example, one of the interesting things is I came out of the ultrasound industry, and when I was first hired as CEO, the founders and I've got this industry guy, he's going to come in and tell us all about the ultrasound world. And my first recommendation to them was to tell them, you're not an ultrasound company. And they said, what are you talking about? We do utilize ultrasound technology. So that's the technology you utilize. Don't get too hung up in technology. But the minute you say the word ultrasound, it conjures up all kinds of expectations of an existing paradigm. And so what I felt was we need to find concrete examples, not so much of what we are, but what we're not, and how that changes the paradigm. And so without getting into a big technology discussion about it, and then give comparative examples as to why are certain comparative companies getting huge investments. One of the spaces that you hear a lot about vein illuminators these days. They basically use infrared to illuminate veins so you know where they are. A company called AccuVein got $23 million in venture funding, what to me is a crazy idea. It's cool technology, but we feel we can be extremely disruptive to that technology if we don't market ourselves as an ultrasound company. And so I think that helps us in terms when we're talking to potential investors to say a technology that we can clearly cannibalize just got $23 million. And that can help your argument. So, but I think my biggest takeaway from what all the gentlemen said here is it's all about milestones. You got to be very, very clear on what you're going to be able to accomplish with various levels of funding. The final thing I'll say is, in my mind, as we navigate this tricky road, I also think I've become much more open to, we're sort of a tweener in that we're looking for about $2 million of Series A funding right now with an option of Series B for $2 million more, and we believe that gets us through all the milestones we need to get through to start looking for an exit. That leaves us in kind of a in-between. I actually wasted a fair amount of time, to be honest, talking to venture capital companies. We just don't need enough money for them, to be honest. If we're not looking for 10, 12, 15 million, it's really not worth the administrative cost of them doing the deal with us. And so I'm looking increasingly, I think where a lot of the money is going to come from going forward is from collaborative companies, where I have a friend who's actually in town talking to a major medical manufacturer here in Minneapolis today about a startup that trying to work a deal where they make an investment in the company, the founder, the existing expertise gets it to certain milestones, and then there's a predetermined exit price once they reach those milestones. So again, that just leaves it, and there's a lot of collaborative companies out there that are looking to diversify, because one of the things that was said in the meeting on payers and so forth is they are looking for standardization. Well, getting someone to standardize on your little corner of the world product is going to be very difficult. If you can tie it to an existing product line that has clout with all of the group purchasing organizations and all the regulatory bodies and all of those types of things and slide into their portfolio, you're going to have a much faster path. You're going to have to give up some control, but I think in the environment we're in, it's something you have to be open to.
You have a question?
I do.
Okay, I was going to give the panelists one opportunity to add anything now that they've heard from each other, if there's anything that you want to add, and then we would open it up for questions.
Go ahead. No? Again, think about incubators. as you talked about, yeah, you're in a spot where you're too small. I mean, you can't move their needle on their funds. So you either have to figure out a way to get into one of their incubators, or you have to figure out how to get with a smaller fund. But the incubators is a good option, and some of the larger VCs have done a nice job of setting those up. And I think Versant, in fact, has a new office here in Minneapolis with the express goal of trying to get more Minnesota investment.
Michigan also has put together, we do have a growth capital symposium that's in May, where all of our venture capitalists actually come together and you can compete, you can look at opportunities to pitch. We also have a major international medical conference in the fall called Innovations. Last year was the first year we did it. We had over 400 people, but we had over 40,000 live streaming it from across the world. We get a lot of venture capitalists there and angels there. We talk about a number of different things, so it would be a great follow-up to this. One of the things that Joe has talked about is the networking and the opportunity to really get to know each other. And so look outside your state, look outside your region. Michigan has a whole set of tools that have been layered together that look at the milestones along the way. And one of the things the investors look at is, have you taken advantage of some of those tools? Did you apply for that initial business accelerator fund? Did you apply for an SBIR? The state has a matching fund for SBIRs. We also have an incubator that has a DARPA grant. So there's a number of different tools. Then when you get to the angels, there's a matching capital grant for angels, and then there's a matching capital grant for ventures. So there's a number of these small incentives that they build along the way to encourage you and take you through some of those steps. So with that, let's open it up for questions.
Actually, I wanted to build on what you just said. I'm curious personally to know, for Amy and for Allan, I don't remember what state you're based out of, Joe.
Insituvue was developed at the University of Pittsburgh, and our
Okay.
corporate office is in Pittsburgh.
Okay, so you represent Michigan, and you're in Memphis. Does Joe have a chance working with you, or is it very state-specific? He's based out of Pennsylvania. Should he overlook anything but Pennsylvania, or are you open for him?
There are some tools that are Michigan-specific that we'll be looking for if they're offered through the state, that they will be looking for you to set up an office in Michigan. But our investors are not specific to just Michigan. So being involved in the Innovations Conference or the Growth Capital Symposium are great opportunities. I'm an international incubator. I have 3 companies. I do IT, medical device, and energy. So I actually have companies that are coming in from other countries and getting established. So there's some tools as outside of Michigan, there's some tools you'll be able to take advantage of, and there's some that won't. But you can still be associated with the incubator. You can still look at some of those tools and use them as access to get to know some of the investors in the network. And there's, as I said, there's a huge medical device and healthcare network being established over Michigan because of the amount of demand and the amount of employment that we're finding.
Allan, anything to add?
Yeah, likewise, we have companies from here, there, and everywhere. Our investors more look at the technology, and we're early stage, so there's no geographic boundary. There are a couple little kinks. One is depending on the bucket of funds they invest, you may just have to register to do business in the state because some of it's from the state, but that's a small hurdle. I mean, it's just a registration.
Now, I don't like to play favorites, but I will admit that I am partial to Joe's company, Insituvue. I was speaking with Gary, a member of your team, and we wrote a post a few months back called Medical Device Dead Zone, which is this little area of 2 to 4 million, which is too small for these guys and too big for these guys. Wouldn't it be a dream if collectively we could find a way to help this guy? But you have clinical trials, you have vast demand every time you go to a trade show, you're clogged with interest, and it's been 18 months, and you've been close, and then it fell apart, and then you almost, and it's like, you represent a lot of people in our group who are in a similar situation, that have a technology that solves real problems. You may even have clinical trials, and you're still not funded. Give us in TV land who are watching this later say, hey, I'm in a situation with you. Here's what I tried. Don't bother this. This was a grand waste of my time. You indicated earlier, if you shoot too high, they're not interested. Are there some things that, boy, if I had known 18 months ago what I know now, and I'll leave that with you, Joe.
Yeah, boy, there's a whole bunch. Because I think it truly is, think everything through. We tend to have, I came out of the business development and sales world, and so really coming into the company, my strength was going to be taking this product to market. And the bottom line is, until we get 510K, there is no product to take to market. And so it's been a crash course in understanding my own limitations. And so I think you really, our tendency as startups is any chance at money, we tend to jump at it without really understanding the landscape of. I'll give you a good example of. We'll spare the guilty here, but there was a venture firm that was all hot to talk to us about. They were on this thing. And we didn't do our due diligence enough on where all the connections were. This connection had come to us through an industry person, and we didn't put two and two together that these two were related. And so we got our two founders, myself, everyone's on a plane, keeping in mind no one's drawing a salary here, so we all buy our plane tickets and we head out there. And the long and short of it is, what this meeting was all about is the brother of the venture fund executive runs a big distribution outfit and wanted some say and access to our product line. He was helping out his brother, is what it amounted to. And we caught on to this very early in the meeting. And so, it's easy to get mad at, but shame on us. Where, you've really got to look for it. We're so ingrained in the world of selling things that, what is the customer's needs? What are the customer's needs? That, especially in the world of investors, you got to understand, what is their business? What is this investor's business, ultimately? And do we fit into that? Do we fit that paradigm at all? And I guess that would be my best advice is there's been wasted time in meetings and so forth, chasing things that really weren't there, I think. So that's probably the best advice I can give, and then missing opportunities of things that might have actually been there, that we just didn't prioritize appropriately.
And on behalf of Allan and myself, I'm going to add that that's one of the, every state has different kinds of incubators and accelerators. And one of their jobs is to understand the investment landscape and understand the tools that are in the region. And that's why making that connection with them can sometimes help you look at that issue up front and understand that business of that investor. For example, I might have a client looking in energy. I'm not going to send them to an investor that I already know focuses in medical device. But if I have a medical device, I have some investors that really have no interest in that. Their model is more in IT. So as an incubator accelerator, that's something that I have to stay on top of. It's difficult sometimes, but we do the best we can, but it's just one step. It's one more additional resource. It's one more additional person that helps you understand the local landscape that may save you some time in the long run.
Yeah, and I think one other thing occurred to me on Joe's question, and that is one thing to always be clear on, is the bottom line is, if you don't definably change the economics of healthcare, your product, if you don't either do that or you don't definably change how care is delivered, nobody's going to care. They don't care how cool your technology is. Coolness doesn't sell anymore, I'm sorry, unless you're selling apps to, which is where all the investment money's going. So it's, it's really a matter of locking in. How are we going to do that? And that's where you can really take a lot from the earlier presentation, so forth, on the landscape of how are these hospitals under healthcare. Again, this is using the government to your favor. Under healthcare reform, what's going to be punitive? to the market if they don't do certain things, and where can we slot into that and help the cause in terms of, because you're changing the structure, the cost structure of how care is delivered. You are. If you're saving the money, you don't have to be necessarily driving revenue, you can be saving the money too. And so it's really focus on those two things. We tend to get real wrapped up in our own technology too for technology's sake. And if you can't change the landscape of care, it's not going to matter.
Yeah, it's a really good point. I'd also suggest as you take a look at your business, just think about a couple things. You know, there's enough scarcity of money, but also look at yourself. I mean, if you show up to a presentation, you don't have your business plan in order, then that's a problem. If you show up and you know you don't have a path to get anywhere. I talked about regulatory path. There's other things too. You know, your customer acquisition path. There's all these things. A lot of business plans really are just unrealistic right now, and so really check yourself and have somebody else check that as well, just to make sure that when you show up, you really are able to put your best foot forward.
Thank you. This was a great overview. Thank you so much. I'm really curious about to what extent any of you incubators or any of you innovators are looking at emerging markets, and how much you think, you know, whether it's frugal innovation. I mean, I'm talking perhaps about really end of the distribution chain, not necessarily, you know, the biggest hospital in Ethiopia. I'm just really curious about how you are seeing the investment landscape responding to a huge trend and explosion really in innovation in that space. Thank you.
Well, I can go first. We're actually not, but we're in an unusual situation. We have a very low reg bar. So we don't need to accelerate our activities by going outside of the U.S. And we have an extremely large market here with, as I said before, coverage coding and payment already in place. So a unique situation for us. We haven't had to do that. We've thought a lot about it. We feel like we should be doing it, but there's really no impetus for it.
I was just going to say, as a private equity firm, our last couple of investments, there's more business for both of those outside the U.S. than within the U.S. So kind of plays at a little bit different angle. But yes, we look at things where we think they're applicable to today's marketplace globally. So we'll look at those investments, differently than maybe we did a few years ago. The other thing, we're looking at partnering with private equity firms who have a similar strategic vision as we do in certain markets, i.e. like a Brazil. So we'll work with partners to say, okay, maybe there's a syndication or a co-op opportunity as it relates to something that they're very knowledgeable about in a local market that we think we can bring some value from an operating perspective.
Yeah, we would like to. We actually have generated a large amount of interest in the international markets. Or we get regular inquiries from distribution all over the world. We've mainly focused in the U.S. out of the gate as well. The main reason for that is actually healthcare reform, because we have a device that very directly, we believe, can impact the infection rate. So we're sort of following that path because it's really the one that's got momentum right now. And we feel we can change outcomes in that space. And then usually what happens, now if that wasn't the case, we probably would be looking more immediately internationally, but what we anticipate will happen is if we can get adoption based on the drivers under healthcare reform here, the outfits like NICE, which is the kind of like the CDC of Europe, they will usually adopt similar things if outcomes are proven to be favorable. So we're saying all the momentum's in the United States. If we could prove concept here, it will translate. But no, that's a good question, because we keep our ears open too. That good example is a company I came from was called Ultrasonics, which just sold to Analogic. You'd be amazed where your pockets of success are. When you looked at a map of where they sold systems, it sometimes didn't. It was all strength of distribution and what that particular healthcare environment was like. They'd sell 18 systems in Vietnam and 5 in Mexico. You know, so. It's a lot of it is just keeping your ears open.
This is going to be our last question because we've got to conclude the panel. So,
Done a great job summarizing sources for funding, I've been actually looking for funding for the past several years and have been unsuccessful in the U.S. because we are looking for something in a $25 to $50 million range after already having spent $30 million in developing a really disruptive technology in cardiac diseases. And what we are finding, because of the timeline that it takes to get that into the market, U.S. investors are reluctant to provide funding, even though I find it interesting. What we are in the process of doing right now is to finding a lead investor who will put up $5 million. That's what everybody else is looking for as well. Lead investors are, have somebody else do all the work, then we'll come in, and we actually have promises for the rest of the money if we can find this lead investor. The interesting part is that this story has now gotten to China. We have actually had a Chinese investment company visit us because we've already sold 2 systems to China, and they're excited about the non-invasive technology that we have focused on can save literally tens of billions of dollars in healthcare costs. In fact, addressing an earlier speaker, we can avoid the limitation of reimbursement on hospitals because our technology addresses early detection of heart disease, and the statistics are such that people with chest pains arrive at hospitals and 70% of them don't have heart disease. And yet they get taken into hospitals and then causing this reimbursement problems, where our technology in 15 minutes can decide whether the chest pain originates from heart disease or chest pain or indigestion or something else. So they don't have to be admitted. So anyway, it's an interesting story, but keep in mind larger types of funding needs as well as the readiness of foreign investors to come in now and take over the technology.
Was there a question there?
I think that it was more of it was an additional experience in what he's finding that he was sharing with all of us, which is something that we were asking also the audience to do, is share what those real life examples are. Agreed, sometimes the United States investors aren't willing to go there, and sometimes it is offshore investors that help bring it, and sometimes it is going to be your first sale is in another country. So I think that the message there is keeping a very open and flexible mind and understanding that you might have to change your pathway in order to get to the market the first time. And would you please join me in thanking our panel, and they'll be around so you can answer some questions if you have them.